In this video, we're going to port our work over that we've been carrying out on the pathfinding over to the terrain that was produced during Ian's workshop. We're going to look at how we can incorporate the terrain material, sort of have our pathfinding start to affect the terrain layers and really start to decorate the terrain. So to begin with, because I worked on these, they're in two different projects for the time being. I'm going to go and basically select everything inside of my content folder, except for the pathfinding level that I've created because it's now redundant. And I'm going to go Asset Actions Migrate, and you're just going to quickly check over everything I want to migrate. And that's all looking good. Well, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly find the level that I want to port it to. And I'm going to go Show in Explorer. And this is a quick way to find the content browser that we can migrate to. So you can see this is the path here that I need to go to. For you, it will be different. And I can now go over into my migration settings and I can pick that content folder. And you'll see that once I've selected it, the migration will happen. And there were no warnings, which means that the migration has been successful. Okay, so now inside of the new project, we can see that my tools have arrived. If you have not already, you'll need to make sure that you have the scriptable tools modes plugged in, enabled again inside of this project if they were turned off because you hadn't, you did this inside of a different project. If you are working in the same project, this whole step was redundant. So now to begin with, I'm going to go ahead and open the scriptable tools mode. Maybe you can go and select it up here or press Shift 9 on the keyboard. I'm going to click on the Splines tool. If it takes a little while, it's probably because the Houdini session needs to connect. We need to go and make sure that the BGU file is hooked up if it's become unconnected there. And then we're just going to go ahead and first of all, I'm going to click to add a new spline and I'm going to make it span the whole terrain like so. I'm going to go ahead and hit recook. And if it doesn't work, then there's a couple of areas that we need to remember. So if you do remember, we need to make sure that we have enabled edit layers on our terrain. And secondly, we need to also make sure that our landscape has the layer set up for the landscape edit layer called paths that we've created. So we go to our landscape editing mode. You can see that we only have right now a base layer. So we need to create a new layer. I'm going to rename this one to paths. And we're going to click Reserve for Splines. And now we see straight away we get something. Well, let's go and select our Pathfinder, or let's go and run the tool once more just to double check that there wasn't an artifact that was produced by the missing layer. And we can see definitely it was not. So that means there's some difference in the setup between this level and our other level. And rather than trying to figure out what the issue is here, because it's bound to be some kind of scaling, rotation, something along those lines, what we're going to do is we're going to think back to when we had an issue with the spline output not cooking correctly. And the way we resolved that issue was we built a little kind of cache tool, a little baker into our pathfinding tool that would allow us to save out the splines that were being sent from Unreal to Houdini and then inspect them on disk. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to build a little utility that's going to allow us to export out this geometry of the terrain and create a new cache on demand. Okay, so how are we going to do that? Well, if you remember, we already have a prepare pathfinding mesh digital asset or subnetwork inside of Unreal, which takes in as default just turn off this preview, a height field, and then it runs it through a process that turns it into a mesh that is suitable for pathfinding. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a very quick little digital asset. We're going to bring that over to Unreal, and we're going to save out a new pathfinding mesh for use in this level. Okay, so let's go first of all and go create digital asset. And I'm going to go and find the library with the OTLs. So this is going to be inside of, for me, Pegasus 2024, Houdini library OTLs, and I think that this is the one. We're going to call it Pegasus Terrain, Pegasus Prepare pathfinding mesh, like so. Pegasus, prepare pathfinding mesh. And it's going to be in the namespace Pegasus. Okay. We're not going to worry about that cooking. And just like before, we're going to jump inside, and off to the side of this output here, we're going to create a ROP geometry output. We're going to put the save to disk, and we're going to put the output file location as parameters on the HDA. Save those, accept. Okay, we're not going to allow it to cook. And for the time being, we're going to leave output file blank as the default. We can see that the parameter name is SOP output. So actually what we're going to do is just rename that file output to be just file for consistency. Okay, so we've created a new digital asset. So if I save that node type, I can now go back to Unreal, and we find our location of our other HDAs by right-clicking, and we can go find source HDA. It's going to bring up the location in Windows Explorer. We can now find our Pegasus prepare pathfinding mesh. So we'll bring that in here as well. Now, instead of building a descriptable tool this time, we're just going to instantiate the Pegasus pathfinding mesh at the origin. We're going to make sure that we pick the output file. Oh, that's the wrong, the wrong digital asset. So the prepare pathfinding mesh, instantiate that at the origin. We're going to make sure that we pick the correct output file, which is the pathfinding mesh BGO. I'm going to set the input to be a world input. And then we're going to start selection, pick the landscape, use the current selection. I'm going to make sure that, you see, I should have turned this off previously. I actually don't want to generate the output like so, although it's good because we can see that the terrain has been, is perfectly matching. I'm actually going to click on do not generate outputs. There we go. And finally, we're going to go ahead and we're going to click on the save to disk button like so. Okay, so that's our prepare pathfinding mesh digital asset. And now if we jump back to Houdini, we can put down a file node, and if we reload the geometry, or if we actually go and find that geometry on disk, we're going to see that we now get our new height field. So if you compare that to what we were working with previously, it turns out that actually I was working on a slightly different version of the terrain, which is why we didn't see it lining up. And what this of course means now is I can go ahead and delete that digital asset because it's done its work. I can go back to my scriptable tool. I can make sure that I'm targeting that pathfinding mesh once more. And now if I go ahead and click somewhere, drag that out and hit recook, we now get a beautiful path across our terrain. And finally, we're at a stage that I wanted us to get to a bit earlier, which is the stage of getting the kind of weight painting of the terrain path as well as the height modulation. So that's what we're going to look at doing next. So first of all, we need to take a little look inside the material, or rather, let's have a little look inside the landscape settings and see what we're working with. If we go to the Paint tab, you can see that we already have a few different layers. And now we can see something else that's gone wrong too. Although we've created the path on the terrain, one thing that we're actually missing is a dedicated spline edit layer to receive the painting. So I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to call it paths. I'm going to click reserve for splines. Yep. There we go. Now we're actually getting that height deformation in that we want to see. And if I go back to the paint layer, I can just pick one of these layers that I want to be drawn on the terrain. And the one that I think I'm going to go for is the one that is called paths. So if you don't have paths already, just pick one of the other layers. So debris or lowlands, it doesn't really matter. I think I'll actually go for sand. And what I'm going to do is make sure that the splines are correctly configured with the attributes that tell the splines which terrain weight layer they should be painting to. So in this case, it's going to be sand. So let's go back to Houdini and let's go into our terrain pathfinding tool once more. and we just need to configure a new attribute. So just like we've set some of these other information on the splines here, where we've got the telling it which landscape to write to and the fact that it's a spline, we're going to go and quickly take a look at the Houdini docs for Unreal Engine. We're going to look once more at the landscapes and the splines output, and we're going to go down and look at the attributes that we want to set. And the attribute that I think we want to set is going to be, we can set the half width. That could be an interesting one. So let's grab that one for now. And we can set this later. And let's just double check. That is a point attribute. So actually we need to make sure that we have a new wrangle here that also goes over points. There we go. So F at Unreal Landscape Spline half width. And I'm just going to comment it out for now. We also have the side fall off, like so. We have end fall off. That just means at the very end of the road is what happens. And there we go, the paint layer name that we want to write to. I think that's where we want to do it. Okay, these are segment attributes, very interesting, but something to look at later. So we want to set the S at Unreal Landscape Spline control point, what a name that is. And we're going to set it to be equal to sand, like so. And let's just go now double check that. We do actually have one called sand, we do. So we're setting a sand, and now set point attributes, and this one is set segment attributes. I'm going to save that. I'm going to go back to Unreal. Going to go to our tool, the terrain pathfinding. I'm going to click re-import, rebuild all instances. Okay, and then we're going to go up to the splines tool, and we're going to try and recook it. All right, so we're still not seeing the weight layer getting painted to. So let's just go and have a little look. Maybe there's some more stuff that we need to do with the settings first of all. In fact, let's just try painting the sand somewhere. We'll create a new layer, make sure that we can actually paint stuff. Okay, so we definitely can paint it. So I'm just going to delete that layer. There we go. And let's go and double check the documentation, see if we're missing anything. The paint layer name property on the control point. That feels like the one that we want to use. And we also have the Unreal Landscape Spline segment paint layer. So let's have a little attempt with this one instead. Okay, like so. Go ahead and save. And we're going to click, save, that's all we need to do there. Go down to pathfinding, going to hit re-import, rebuild all instances. And finally we have it. So it was the segment layer. And now you're going to see that as we use the tool, if we go and just add a new spline, and a new spline over here, hit recook, we can then click on that spline again once more, and maybe actually let's just deselect it and start drawing a new one. So there we go, add a new point over there. We can start to maybe add some more splines coming up from this point, and then we're going to deselect it. We can add one that goes all the way up to the top of the mountain. And we'll pull that down to this intersection as well, like so. And then we'll go ahead and hit recook once more. Okay, you can see that it starts to add some pretty believable looking paths. And you may notice as well that we end up with paths that kind of intersect with each other. and it's generally a good idea. You could spend a lot of time working on a technical solution, or you can just bring it to that point of intersection and do a little recook to avoid creating lots of redundant overlapping splines like so. And yeah, let's just do a little bit of work building out all these paths. And just like that, in under 2 minutes, or just about 2 minutes, I was able to set up a complicated and interesting network of roads across the terrain. I would, of course, want to sculpt this further, and there are things I'd like to change. So the width of the paths at the moment is pretty extreme. I think they're too wide, and they are also not really I don't have much control over how the pathfinding algorithm routes across the terrain. So let's deal with those two issues one at a time. So first, I'm going to hop back over to Houdini, and on the set point attributes, I'm just going to make sure that I am actually setting the Unreal Landscape Spline half width on the points, and this is in meters. So 1 meter is across is going to be 2 meters wide. Maybe let's go with 1.5, and we will expose this to be a parameter later. So I'm going to save this node type, go back to Unreal. I'm going to re-import that. Now it's very important that you don't rebuild all instances or recook the node itself, because it's going to end up creating duplicate paths, which is what we spent so long trying to avoid. So we're going to go up and hit recook now. It's going to take a little bit of time, but then once it's done, we're going to end up with much nicer sort of width paths across our landscape. I think that the sand is actually looking a little bit strange, so maybe I'm going to opt for the dirt instead. So of course, to do that, I could go back and modify it in here, but that's not really enhancing the kind of functionality of the tool itself in Unreal. So let's have a little look at how we can do that, as well as setting some of the other parameters on the tooling from directly inside of this parameter menu box.